Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited to kick off 2025 with our first Ask Me Anything session, or AMA, from jobs to journeys, unlocking career growth through internal mobility. I'm Amy Jenkins. I'm the Director of Client Success here at Engagedly, and I'm incredibly excited to introduce our speakers today. We have Srikant Chellappa and Dr. Edie Goldberg, experts who will be answering all of your burning questions about internal career pathing and mobility. Some quick introductions before we dive in here. Sri is the CEO and co-founder of Engagedly. He's also the author of Into the Blue, Implementing Ikigai Philosophy to Create a Meaningful Workplace, and a leader who's incredibly passionate about helping organizations and HR leaders create programs that empower and enable employees to be their best. And Dr. Edie Goldberg is the founder and president of E.L. Goldberg and Associates. In addition to her her HR strategic advisory work, she's also the immediate past chair of the board for the SHRM Foundation and author of The Inside Gig, How Sharing Untapped Talent Unleashes Organizational Capacity, the playbook for implementing an internal talent marketplace and internal mobility strategy. So we have got two incredibly knowledgeable people joining us today, answering all of your questions. If you didn't hear as we got started, please feel free, enter questions into that chat, engage with one another. This is definitely meant to be a conversation today. We're not going to be sharing slides or anything like that. So definitely be part of it, participate with us. So to get us started, Edie, I think it would be great if we kind of define what is internal career mobility? I mean, I think this is a really timely topic as HR professionals, we're trying to uncover how we want to implement strategies like this within our organizations, but also as we're thinking through what are the next steps in our careers and how do we create paths internally within the organizations we're really passionate about to grow ourselves.
Great. So I'm going to share with you, there are a lot of different definitions of internal mobility, which kind of makes it a little bit of a problem in HR. But internal mobility generally refers to moving people to a new job within the organization in order to create a learning opportunity for people. Now, there are many people who are internal mobility specialists within their company that are often focused on geographic moves. So often those geographic moves are meant to put somebody in a new culture to provide a learning experience or help them apply their skills in a different context. So internal mobility, moving jobs to create a learning opportunity. But I also want to share a new way to think about internal mobility that's a little bit more flexible. And it's based on my book, The Inside Gig. So rather than having to leave your job to take on a new challenge or to apply your skills in different contexts, we're suggesting that employees can simply make room for one additional project that's outside of your day-to-day responsibilities rather than having to leave that job altogether. So inside gigs are project-based opportunities for learning, growth, and career exploration that help you kind of just get exposed to new things. So internal mobility, career mobility, why is it important? And, I want to start off by saying we learn a lot more by doing than sitting in the old traditional classroom and just taking in information. That's kind of abstract. If you're learning about leadership rather than learning about leadership while you're leading people. So leveraging projects to facilitate learning in the flow of work helps to really embed kind of learning while you're doing something. And it's really seen as a superior way of learning than just our traditional taking a class or reading a book. But anybody who knows me knows I'm a data queen. So I'm going to share a bunch of statistics for you about internal career mobility and why this conversation is so important for all of you. According to McKinsey research, and I will tell you there are a whole bunch of other companies that have studied this and said the same thing, a lack of career development and advancement is the #1 reason why y'all are leaving your current job. Employees who make internal moves are 3.5 times more likely to be engaged than employees who don't. That's from our friends at Gallup. And this is really important. Engagedly. We know from prior research that engaged employees are more productive. So if your company is interested in increasing productivity, career mobility is really important, because when people are learning and growing, they're more engaged and therefore they're more productive. So that's a really great statistic to share with your business leaders about why this is important. And some research that I had shared in my book, Glassdoor data says that only 1/3 of millennials thinks that their organization is using their skills well. And 42% of them say that they're likely to leave their job if they're not learning enough. And I would argue it's not just millennials. Anybody, any employee, regardless of what their career stage is, regardless of what their age is, they want to continuously learn and grow. And LinkedIn created a workforce learning report that said 93% of employees said that they would stay with the company longer if their company invested in their career. So tons of data. I'll share some of it in the chat because I know people love data. But that's kind of what is internal career mobility and why is it important?
Yeah, I think those are great statistics. And it is so important to have that in your back pocket as you're trying to build this use case, right? You can't just walk into the room with leadership and the C-suite and say, I want to create a career mobility program. You've got to start to demonstrate what could that ROI and that impact be to the organization. Sri, do you have any follow-up thoughts?
Yeah, I think the one thing, thank you, Edie. That was very helpful way to explain that. I'm a big believer in internal mobility, primarily because I believe, I think the one issue I feel personally we have is we put people into boxes, into monoliths. Like, hey, if you're a marketing analyst, this is your box. If you're a systems analyst, this is your box. If you're a checkout clerk, this is your box. But we are more than just the role defined in that box. We have other skills that we have. We have other interests and desires that we have. And this is one way to harness that, right? Somebody who's in the marketing group might really be interested in also being involved in product development, because that person is getting feedback from the market on the improvements they can do in the product, and they want to get involved with that. That's an example, obviously, right? So I think internal mobility using these inside gig can really help create these opportunities where they can leverage adjacent skills or related skills that are not necessarily in that box, and actually bring that cross-functional knowledge from other group to be more impactful than otherwise. And to that point, they feel like they're actually have an impact on the organization. And I think that's very important for people to really stay engaged and stay longer, is when they feel they're having an impact in the organization. So that's the only add nuance to what you are saying, Edie, from a human construct perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to recognize, we talk about this when we're growing up, right? We're in high school, we're in college, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And then we get into a job and it's kind of, well, now you picked your lane and you're going to stay in it. And, hopefully you're going to grow and that. But I love this idea of we are continually learning and evolving. And so we should open those opportunities to each other within our businesses too.
Amy, can I just build on that? Don't stick in your lane. I mean, today, there are new skills that are becoming important. There are new kind of opportunities that are coming up. And this is one of the things that people do in their career. They say, you know, I've picked this thing and I have to stick with that. And the answer I really think is look at where the strategy of your company is going. Look at where kind of the most important jobs are emerging, or kind of what's becoming more important. And if you can learn and grow in those new areas, you can pivot your career. I know so many people who are on their second, third, fourth career because they've continuously learned, but it requires you to invest in your own learning and move in those new directions that are becoming important.
100%. We can't wait for somebody to tell us what's next. We have to define that for ourselves too, and hope that we're working for an organization that supports us in that. Edie, what are some of the key components to creating a successful program within your organization?
Sure. Well, the first thing is you have to make the opportunities that are available visible to people in your organization. And you have to be really clear about the skills and capabilities that are required for success in those projects. So that could be an internal job posting board, or that could be a newer technology that that helps kind of proffer up opportunities to people because they're a match. So I think understanding a kind of more modern approach is also understanding all the skills and experiences of your employees so that you can do a better job of leveraging them, because we are all more than our current job. You guys have had other positions that you've done where maybe you did something slightly different. Well, maybe that thing that you did that was slightly different is really important to your current company. So there are ways that you can contribute in your company that aren't defined by your current role. And I think it's important for companies to kind of uncover that and know that. And here's where technology is really changing the game in internal career mobility. AI has really helped companies to match people with opportunities based on their skills and experiences. So this is really kind of unleashing a whole new way where you can take your career in a new direction, because if companies are using these AI tools, they can really serve up opportunities, maybe something you never thought of. Mm-hmm. So you have to make the opportunities visible. You have to know the skills of your employees so that you can match them to these opportunities. You have to provide development opportunities to help people gain the skills that they need that will make them eligible for those new jobs. And then the trickiest piece to this is creating a culture where it's okay to move around within your company.
It's actually a good segue into a question we received in our registration. So Ray asked, how do we build buy-in from seasoned managers to kind of shift the mindset to where promoting internally is a good thing, and they don't need to be reluctant of letting go of top performers from their teams? How do you recommend, HR leaders help their managers overcome maybe some of that resistance or hesitation to lose great people?
In my experience, it's really about recognizing and rewarding managers for sharing talent. So I'm aware, because hoarding talent is the biggest barrier to doing this, and managers do it. So we need to find a way to kind of get them over that. You certainly can share it with them, the statistics about people who will leave the company if they don't get new experiences that help them to learn and grow. But I think this kind of recognition and reward system. So at Dolby Laboratories, they use something called a philosophy of net talent exporters. So they recognize and reward their managers for being net talent exporters. That is, people who are willing to allow their employees to move to other areas so that they can learn and grow and contribute in different ways. Having a program like that, I think, is really helpful. But, you know, people do what they get recognized and rewarded for.
Yeah, one thing
I love that idea. Go ahead.
One thing I'll add is, we have as leaders a onus to make sure that we create a culture where talent hoarding is not acceptable. I've seen that over and over again in my own personal career journeys at different organizations where people will not let go of their best performing employee, but the employee is ready to move to a different role or get promoted, but the promotion is not in that department, it's probably in a different department, slightly different role, slightly different function, and they will not let them go. And that can create a lot of ripple effects in the organization because the individual is then underperforming, not living up to their full potential, and eventually will leave. And that's, if once that's communicated loud and clear that this is not allowed, that you really need to consider. I mean, there are considerations, right? If that person is an extremely critical role, you obviously need to figure out who the backup would be if you can bring in somebody else into that role. So there are some planning activities that need to be done. And we have situations in our organization where we move people all the time. And sometimes I have to get involved to fight for a person to be moved. But because we believe in that talent mobility, where yes, you might be a net negative once you leave this person, but it's a net overall positive for the organization, and you will not be, and we recognize that you might be underperforming as a team for a few weeks, months, until we get the new person in, or we upskill somebody else to take that role. And as long as the recognition is there, so you're not penalizing that manager because now they have a one lower performing composition of the team. So that's important, but it's really, to me, it's a big cultural thing. The overall leadership has to be loud and clear that talent hoarding is not allowed and internal mobility is a priority.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Tina had asked a question in our chat too. So we know that employees are heavily relied on by their managers, given extra projects, et cetera, are more likely to experience burnout. How do we make sure our managers are not using this idea to give extra tasks and work to employees without having to promote or pay them in the name of a learning opportunity?
So in my experience, first off, they're generally optional, right? So if you want to take on this new project-based opportunity as a learning experience, that is up to an employee. One of the strategies that we recommend in our book isn't just, and I will say most companies that are using like an internal talent marketplace, they are offering those development opportunities on top of somebody's day job. But what we recommend in our book is working with your employee to understand what they're working on today and what work can be moved around or changed. For example, there's a standing meeting that you attend every week. Is it really critical for you to attend that meeting every week, or can 1 hour of your time be freed up so that you can work on this other project rather than attending that meeting? Or is there something that you do that you're not really great at that kind of drains you and depletes you, that maybe somebody else would be more excited and suited to do that kind of work? So it's about moving work around so that people are working at their optimum value and are engaged by that. And when I add a task on, that's something that you're deeply passionate about, that you're super curious about, that you want to learn about, that doesn't lead to burnout because it actually ignites our engagement. And when people are deeply engaged, they kind of get into that sense of flow, they lose all sense of time, and they're really enjoying what they're doing. That is not the work that leads to burnout. So it's kind of an interesting play of a combination of let's make sure that people are working at their optimum value and don't just pile on, but look at how maybe we can shift things around so that somebody can take on that learning project, and make sure that we're working on things that bring us energy and not deplete us.
Yeah, that's such a great distinction, and making sure that leaders have clarity around the goals of their employees too, right? And so it isn't just giving them a task to give them a task, but giving them a task to show, or an opportunity that shows investment in their future and their overarching growth.
And then reprioritizing, Amy. If I have a set of tasks that I'm being held accountable to in my performance management process, and you're adding something on, where does that sit in the priorities of things, and how will I be recognized and rewarded for doing that?
One more directed at you, Edie, is we're talking about career pathing. I think a lot of us sit in places where we look at our corporate employees and how we can design these structures with people that have more opportunity for learning, that are sitting in front of a computer all day and maybe able to engage with e-learning courses or outside experiences like this, joining a webinar right in the middle of their day. How can we implement this within a primarily frontline workforce? Have you seen organizations do this effectively with their frontline teams as well?
It's a bigger question for sure. I think the basic structure of, making opportunities visible, providing people with access to training, et cetera, still holds for this population. I used to do a lot of work in both grocery and retail. And frontline roles tend to have very different skill requirements than back office or knowledge worker roles. And that's the real difference here. So customer orientation is really important for a frontline worker. But a warehouse employee doesn't often need customer orientation, but they do maybe need to be able to operate heavy equipment. Very, very different skill sets we're talking about here. And then management skills are very different from either of those. So the organization has to be really clear about what are the critical skills across different kinds of roles within the organization to be successful, and then help create a learning path for employees to get there. Sometimes in some roles, that's kind of on your own time. Other times the company provides that. I've seen, because of COVID and there was a lot of, work from home, which frontline workers didn't get to do. I know a number of organizations that had a work from home learning day. So employees who were normally frontline workers got to work from home for purposes of learning. So that was one way of kind of helping them have that experience. But I think articulating the various career paths and what it takes to be successful is really important. But I want to caution the idea that we're going to build out these really detailed career paths and we're going to tell you exactly where to go, because that's what's happened in a lot of companies. And then, AI comes along, or the technology in our company changes and we pivot in a new direction. Employees need to be agile and they need to be curious and learning, because, being open to these new roles as they emerge is something that, as the pace of change in organization keeps picking up, is something that we need to, kind of not spend years and years creating career paths with really specific skills if you're going to go from this step to this step to this step, because it's a little bit more fluid than that.
Sri, any thoughts to add?
Yeah. From a frontline workforce perspective, specifically to your question, I think it's not fundamentally that different. The only issue there is they're usually on the clock, right? It's not like you have very flexible time schedule where you can pick up a project and do it maybe 6 p.m. on an evening or on a Saturday morning. So you're working on a shift, typically on a clock, and you're really busy during that time period. You don't have a lot of time to sit around and and noodle on new projects. So that becomes a challenge, So again, to my point earlier, it has to be a conscious decision by the leadership to say, hey, we will actually create some gaps where they can maybe this person working in the warehouse wants to have some customer facing skills. So maybe that person goes to the checkout counter and works there for like 2 hours a day for a few weeks or whatever that is. I'm just making this up, but that stuff like that could be built into the overall process so that they're not expected to work a full 8-hour shift and then go do that on their own time, because that's not how frontline workforce typically structured. So that's the only nuance I would add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what Edie said at the beginning about the transparency and what's available within your organization, what are the rules that are there, so that people have the opportunity to even understand what's possible, right? If they're in that warehouse environment all day, they don't know what's going on in the corporate office and what roles they may be able to aspire to in the future. So I've heard of companies that do career fairs internally, right? Where they bring the different departments together and they allow employees from all sectors of the organization to talk to those hiring managers and find out what kind of things are accessible to them. It's important to design these career paths, and Edie, I love what you just said about don't be so prescriptive in what it is. You have to let people grow and evolve as the company changes. So how do we balance those needs of the business with employee aspirations?
Who's that question for?
Oh, sorry. That's to you, Edie.
I think it's really important to understand where the direction that the company is going in and to share that with your employees. And so you're really balancing, like, we need you to develop in X, Y, and Z area. The company that I saw that did this the best was IBM, where they were really clear with employees, your skills are declining in value to the organization because we're going to be phasing out that technology or whatever it is. These are the skills that are of growing importance to our company. We don't have enough people who do this. And this is, where we're going to be spending more and more of our time. So employees get really clear on how to build that future career path within their organization. And it's great for, employees to, you might have a particular passion and want to pursue something, but if that's not what your company can use, the company may not provide the kind of investment dollars in you. That might be something that you have to do on your own. But I think of, one employee that I know of who was just, as a side hobby, really interested in videography and learning how to make their own videos. Had nothing to do with their day job, absolutely. But then the company implemented one of these project-based talent management systems, and the communications team needed a video for a new product that they were going to be creating. And this person was able to use their passion project, their passion skills, in a way that actually helped the organization. So I think it's about looking for those connection points, but just understand your company is not going to invest in you if that's not the direction that the company is going in, or if it's something that they see as kind of directly applicable to your job. But that doesn't mean that your passion skills can't be used elsewhere in the company. And it really is important for those of you who are HR leaders who are listening to this to really think about, how do we share with our employees what are the most important skills for the future of our business, and how do we get employees to upskill in those areas, because this is becoming a major concern to organizations.
Sri, anything to add to that point?
No, I think Edie summarized it really well, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and if Susan joined us, she shared a question that's kind of similar to that I think that that answer just addressed. which was around how do we keep employees engaged when those growth opportunities aren't in large supply within our organizations. So I love what you said, Edie, about try to figure out if there are passion projects that you can bring people into so they feel like they're continuing to grow and learn, even if it's not directly tied to a future career path.
I do want to add something to that question, though, because, you know, in the words of the great Beverly Kay, up is not the only way in a career path. And that's what we all think about, is going up. I did a study a number of years ago, and I asked people of all generations, how do you define career success? And 78% of employees defined career success as things that had nothing to do with a promotion. It was about having work that challenged them, continuously learning at work, being passionate about the work that you do, having work-life balance, being in roles where I can have an impact. I don't care if that's the impact on my direct reports, my team, the department, the whole world. And being able to utilize the skills that you have to bring to the table. So understand that career success is not always just about jumping up that ladder, but how do you, if you can't provide your employee with an opportunity that is a promotion, what are other ways that you can challenge them? How do you help them to learn? You know, in ways that perhaps are more lateral opportunities.
Right.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, one thing I was going to add is the understanding the employee's aspiration is another thing that we need to make that as part of corporate culture. So we generally don't go around asking our employees, hey, what is it that excites you? What do you really want to do? And that's not a question. I mean, some in our organization, we do that probably more than I've seen it in other places in my own history of working, where you're really trying to dig deep into what really drives that employee, what are their passion, what is their success. And it's not about just saying, hey, you know, but talking about specific promotions, but it's more like the type of work they want to do, or things they want to learn and grow into. And getting that really well documented, Engagely offers a tool, which my shameless plug here, but where you can document your aspirations really well, and then use that a way to align to say, hey, your aspirations, you know, some of these actually map to some, you know, new projects that we are taking on. So that's an area where we can map you into you know, taking on some projects or gigs in that area, if you will. So having that as a culture, so a lot of this, you know, system can only do so much. Obviously, you know, ultimately, the culture has to drive that behavior, where employees feel open and don't have a fear of retribution when they go and say, hey, you know what, I don't really like what I'm doing here. I really want to do something else and different, and not feel like the manager's gonna, you know, get upset and they're not gonna get the right level of attention in the organization.
And what a shame if a manager is not having that conversation with their employee, because then their only opportunity is to leave the company as opposed to find another opportunity within the company.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how, in your experience, Edie, I mean, how often do you see, or do you know, is there any stats around, do people actually have these conversations with their people?
You know, it's not as frequent as it should be that you know, how is career development? I'm actually writing a new book on performance enablement, and I'm writing the chapter right now on development. And, you know, how often is development really part of that, you know, kind of performance management process? And what are the conversations managers are having with their employees about, you know, what's of interest to you? What do you want to do? And making that not kind of the last thing that you do, the thing that doesn't get any attention, because I think more often than not today, that's what happens. It's literally at the literal and metaphorical end of the form, that development plan, as opposed to being maybe a separate process or maybe an ongoing process or a conversation about what do you want to learn? What, you know, how can we play your skills in a different way? what's important to you from a learning and growth perspective, that we might think about leveraging your skills in new ways. How do we build on your strengths? Those kinds of conversations are really important for driving performance within the company, for developing those employees, and for retaining them.
Do you think that those conversations happen less frequently because people don't know how to have them or aren't confident in having them?
I don't think companies are recognizing rewarding managers for having them, that they're so focused on just goals, and on evaluating performance. So I think, Sri talked before about, it has to be a cultural element, that development is an important part of the company and how you operate. Like, everybody knows Microsoft has become a growth mindset organization, where they're constantly looking at how do we help people to learn and grow to improve individual and organizational performance. So it gets baked into the culture of how they operate. So development becomes much more important in that context.
That makes sense. Sri, you touched on the next question I had for you a little bit, but I'd like you to dive in a little deeper if you can. How can leveraging technology support managers, as we're just talking about, in having these conversations and enabling these programs, as well as supporting employees in seeing their progress?
Yeah, there are many aspects to this. There's a top-down aspect and a bottom-up, and then the best way is obviously to do both. The top-down aspect would be an example of something like putting together a job board or a gig board where people can apply and things like that, right? So you have that approach, which is good because then people can go and match that. Now, the approach of bottom-up is where people express, hey, this is my aspiration, this is what I want to do. So you have tools that you can use to build that. And then at an org level, I can see all the different people or team members in the team that are looking to develop these new skills, or what skills people have, and then be able to match that against maybe potential future roles or future gigs that may have, which are more short-term. So the technology can be very pervasive, or it can be very simplistic. You can just have a simple survey where you just get data from different people, or you can have a more comprehensive gig board, a job board, internal mobility board, where they use AI to match people against the skill sets and offer ideas, even create virtual benches for in succession plans, things of this nature. So there are many ways to go around doing this. I would say at the minimum, we should have development plans in every organization, in the product, in a technology way, using a technology, because then you can actually track development plan over time. Hey, I want to get better at this role, but that might require you to have this additional experience. So you can get this experiential learning that might align to a gig in a different department, but you're still growing because you are developing those skills, but you're taking ownership of maybe a cross-functional project to build some leadership skills. So you can have those tools to build development plans, IDPs, and things like that. So there are many ways to do this, but at the minimum, we should have IDPs and some level of development plans. And then obviously, as the organization matures, they can use AI and skill tracking and skill ontology to really build out that entire ecosystem.
I think that's great. I think there's also use cases for technology outside of the tasks, right? So as we talk about building the cultures, have you seen examples of people, even using Engagedly or other, technology pieces to help build up that culture of learning and that culture of growth?
Well, I think that, like I said, having a more, to Edie's point, separating performance management discussions from development discussions, I think is a very important cultural shift organizations should have, where you're separating the two, and your development discussions are more ongoing, and your performance discussions are also ongoing, but they're not one and the same. They're kind of interspersed. because you really want to give their focus on development. And that includes getting insight into the employees' own desires and aspirations and adjacent skill sets that they may have, or skill sets outside that box they're playing in, they may have as well.
Fantastic. We are just about up on time, but I want to make sure we do open the door up to everyone who's attending. If you have a question that you haven't put in the chat yet, please go ahead and add that. Tina just added one in. I'll start this off with you, Edie. Do you have any thoughts on employees that are in roles that don't traditionally have a lot of upward movement in healthcare, for example, certified nursing assistants that don't want to be nurses, want to move into other roles? We've kind of touched on this, but maybe something specific, for an example, around healthcare.
Well, I think that, understanding, again, we're more than our current job. So understanding all the skills and experiences that you have and where your passion lies. What do you want to do? If you don't want to be a nurse, what is it that you want to do? This issue of a lot of people don't want to be a supervisor, don't want to go into that management role. So companies often develop kind of specialist career paths that allow people to learn and grow in ways that don't go into supervisory positions. So I see that very commonly in engineering companies, because a lot of the engineers are introverted and I don't mean to stereotype, my husband is one, so and they definitely don't enjoy that part of the job. So a lot of people kind of take that, if you will, guru path. But within nursing, there's a lot of certification that's involved in some of those kinds of roles. So it might be, are there additional things that you can do in addition to the work that you do today that complement, that wouldn't take you on that nurse path per se? Or are there just other roles within the hospital that would more speak to your heart, to your personal passions and interests? So looking around more and seeing what are the other kinds of opportunities that exist within this organization where I might have interest, I think is important.
Sri,
anything that you would add to that?
No, I completely agree. I think that's, but here's the challenge though, right? Sometimes those roles or those type of projects may not be available in your organization. So that is one area to take into consideration as well, that, that it's just not there, and be candid about it.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, we've discussed a lot of great topics today. I know I've taken away a lot of really key pieces and learnings today. But Edie and Sri, if there was one thing that you would ask the people that attended today to kind of walk away with and take to heart and consider bringing back to their organizations, what would that point be? And we can start with you, Edie.
Ooh, I think it is so important to listen to your employees about what their passions and interests are. Talent, we are in a huge talent shortage, and the skills that we need today are growing exponentially. And so there are a lot of opportunities to learn and grow. And companies need to be investing in their employees to help people move into these new roles where, frankly, the labor market doesn't exist to fill those roles for organizations. So career development, career management, career mobility are all going to be so important, both to helping employees thrive, as well as helping organizations to fill those critical roles that will be driving the success of the company.
Love that. Sri?
Well, I'll go back to my speech about talent hoarding and how that's not acceptable. I would say my biggest takeaway, if somebody wants to go from this call, would be to really get the management to advocate that talent hoarding is not acceptable, and people should be open to letting people go into different roles in different groups and different departments, and not hide their best people undercover. So that's a big problem I see all the time. And that's just doing that one thing can make a huge difference in the organization.
And that only serves the manager, not the company.
Exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely. And the point you made earlier, Edie, that person is probably going to end up leaving, right? You're not going to keep that person on your team. They're going to go find that opportunity somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well, Edie, Sri, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a fantastic discussion. Lots of good attention in the chat as well. We appreciate everybody for taking time out of your busy days to join us. We will have a recording of this available that we'll send out to everybody that registered. Feel free to connect with Sri and Edie on LinkedIn. Follow them to learn more of their great insights. And so we can find out when Edie's new book comes out too, so we can all go grab a copy.
It'll be a while.
But her book, The Inside Gig, is an
that's
amazing.
Available. That's
available.
The Inside Gig, and that's available today.
We've got 2 books to read now and 1 to read later. So we're all set for our reading list for 2025. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.